Hi guys, today we've been shooting the Jimmy Page player study and I'm going to take a little bit of time to sort of show you how we got the tone and how you can kind of get it with your gear. So let's start with the guitars. Jimmy Page, obviously one of the most iconic guitarists of all time. He's been famous for playing a lot of different guitars. Obviously there's a double-necked SG that he played famously on Stairway to Heaven. Most of the time you're going to see him pictured with a Les Paul, kind of like this one. This is the same one that we used for the Slash player study. Jimmy Page had a very, very similar one, sort of a few different 59s, I believe, over the years. This is a great, absolutely beautiful guitar. Again, two PAF style, vintage PAF style pickups. They give you a kind of bluesy rock tone. They're quite low output. They're very dynamic, which really suits Jimmy Page's playing. He's very, very dynamic player. And if you've got a pickup that's kind of too high output, it's going to compress that and squash it down, and you're going to lose a lot of it. Okay, so this is the main one. Now, early on in his Zeppelin career and in his Yardbirds career, he was most often found playing a Telecaster or an Esquire. This is the one that we've got for the recording. It sounds absolutely fantastic, really bright, really in your face, quite aggressive. Obviously with the maple board, you can get rosewood ones which are a bit more mellow. The maple one is personally how I like my Telecasters, a bit more kind of spangly, I guess you'd call it, a bit more aggressive, a bit more in your face. But if you don't want aggressive and in your face, then just get a different guitar. This is absolutely a fantastic example. So that's pretty much it for guitars. It's the Les Paul or the Telecaster for kind of later Jimmy Page and earlier Jimmy Page. Realistically, you're going to be able to get pretty close with both of them. They're not that different sounding. They're both quite punchy, quite aggressive, quite middle range, a lot of mid range, sorry. The Telecaster is a bit brighter and perhaps a bit more aggressive. Les Paul a little bit more compressed and sort of deeper and richer. So anyway, that's it for the guitars. Let's go and have a look at the amps. Okay, so you join me here in Amp Corner. It was the Plexi again, I'm not going to lie. This kind of vintage Marshall thing is going to get you in the right area for Jimmy Page. He didn't actually use Marshalls until relatively late in his career, I think Led Zeppelin 4 sort of era, but it's always been that kind of British sounding sort of not that high gain amp, but kind of medium gain amp, I would say is probably fair. He used Valcos, Supros, which are American, but they do have that kind of vintage. Well, it is an American sound, but it's a similar kind of mid-gainy kind of thing. Orange, I know he's had an OR120, more recently an AD50 and an AD30. There's the Marshall JH100 that he's been playing fairly recently as well, which is the Jimi Hendrix model. All fantastic sounding amps. So essentially lots of different amps going on. You've kind of got to make a choice. You're not exactly going to have a wall of every single amp that he's ever used. We got very close with this, we thought. Quite a bright, kind of in-your-face sound. As I say, settings-wise, this was with the Telecaster primarily. We had the settings both just above 4. You don't want to get too much gain with Jimmy Page. It kind of kills the dynamics. You need it to be where when you're on the guitar on volume 10, it needs to be kind of singing out a little bit and reasonably aggressive, but you need to be able to back off the volume on the guitar to sort of 6 or 7 and be able to get a reasonably clean tone. So if you're too high, if the gain's too high, that's not going to happen and it's not going to sound like Jimmy Page. A lot of the time also with his more famous recordings, like Black Dog for instance, he didn't even use an amp. They actually went straight into the desk, but it was a valve desk, so they were getting drive off the valves. Very difficult to recreate that, obviously, with modern equipment. You can't really do it with digital stuff, so you have to kind of go for a guitar amp, obviously, and this was what we got closest to it with. So let's go on to the pedals and we'll go from there. Okay guys, so you join me here over at the pedals. Now, there wasn't a lot of pedals going on with Jimmy's sound most of the time. It was really just getting the amp right, getting the guitar right. That said, there was the Solar Sound Tone Bender Fuzz, which he used a fair amount. Vox Wah. He's even onto the sort of Digitech whammy pedal, which is obviously a much more modern invention. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nearly 30 years old, but when we're talking about Led Zeppelin, you know, mid to late 60s, it's pretty recent. It's not a big part of his sound, at least it wasn't when in his kind of, you know, heyday, I guess you could call it. So what we used pedals for was to kind of get us closer to the sort of basic tone. We just used it to push the amp a little bit more when we needed to kind of go up to 11 and even 12. So let's go down and have a look at the pedals. Now, the key one was the Wampler Ecstasy Overdrive, which is now known as the Euphoria. You'll notice with the gain is very, very low. We've got it on about 9 o'clock, so about sort of, I guess you'd call it 2.5 out of 10. The bass is the same. We didn't want to affect the tone too much. We just gave it a little bit of bass just to sort of thicken it out a tiny bit. Tone is just over half. Giving us quite a bright sound, which is what you kind of want when you're going for this kind of thing. It's almost treble booster-esque, really. Volume was set just above unity, just to, as I say, to push the amp a little bit more. So I'll give you a demonstration of the sound. This is just dry guitar. Obviously, no prizes for seeing that this is the Telecaster sound. We used that for the sort of rock and roll style track. So I'll give you an idea. So. Love that sound. Okay, so with the overdrive on, it's only quite subtle. So I'll start without it, and you'll see when I pop it on. Okay, and I'm something else, sort of Zeppelin-y style. And now with the pedal. Okay, cool. So you'll see it's a very, very subtle boost. It kind of just, it's almost like literally turning your volume knob on your guitar up to sort of 11 or 12 if you could do that. It's very, very subtle. It doesn't really change the tone, keeps it kind of vintage and sort of close to the original. Okay guys, so in summary, Jimmy Page, Telecaster or Les Paul, depending on what kind of sound you're after. Not too much gain on the amp, be really careful. Kind of, I would always say as little as you can kind of get away with. Nice and bright, you want it to sound very, very toppy. There's not a great amount of mids in there. And then if you can, crank the amp up. That'll give you the bottom end, generally, at least with a Marshall or an Orange British style amp. That will get you close. If you don't have that sort of British style, Orange, Vox, Marshall, that kind of thing, you can get the close with a Fender. You just have to be a bit more creative with your pedals. A very open, transparent sounding overdrive will do it. Again, keep the gain down, the brightness up. It should get you in the right kind of ballpark and sort of make it sound kind of old 60s treble booster kind of tone. Always use your own ears as well. You need to be kind of constantly comparing it to the original. I can't tell you exactly what will work with your stuff, but this should be a good guide. Okay, I'll see you next time.